Sensory Empower podcast. I'm Bethany, your host. I'm a holistic occupational therapist with over a decade of experience in supporting individuals helping to transform their world through sensory empowerment. This podcast is your guide to the transformative world of sensory storytelling, holistic tools, and empowerment strategies. Welcome back to the Sensory Empower podcast. My name is Bethany and I'm your host. And I'm just really excited to dive into a topic that has been a very common theme lately in my life, in trainings that I've been giving and when I'm talking with parents. And it's really about thinking about building capacity. So increasing our capacity to be able to hold space for others. The other big theme that I've noticed in my education when I'm working with individuals is the compassion we can have when we come from a lens of curiosity when it comes to different individuals' sensory needs. And so I'm really thinking about the cool opportunities that this can provide when we're deepening into something, especially when it keeps kind of showing up as a theme again and again in conversations and trainings and client sessions, and really reflecting on what it truly means to understand each other's sensory needs and how do we increase our understanding, increase our curiosity, and increase our ability to build this capacity to hold space with compassion. I think there's a lot of things going on as well when we think about understanding things at a little bit of a deeper level, exploring how this can kind of transform connections and relationships, whether that's with child or partners or colleagues. And I'll share some reflections that I've had recently with a recent training that beautifully captured this shift in perspective. So as a foundation, when I think about this underlying piece of the truth of what I love to teach, we are all sensory beings. We all have sensory needs, every single one of us, animals included, right? We all have a nervous system that is constantly taking in information from the world. Sights and sounds and textures and smells and movement and our internal cues of interoception like heartbeat and hunger, bladder awareness, muscle tension, what our feelings feel like in our body. And the way our body and our brain are able to receive, register, and then such cool ways to be able to quickly or slowly or intensely or subtly respond and react. And it shapes everything. It shapes how we relate, how we work, how we rest, how we connect with others, right? If we have a really reactive response, it can sometimes limit some of those deeper levels of connection with others. And many of us experience, myself included, the world when it is too bright, too loud, too much. And others, more of the sensory seeker world that I grew up with, wanting tons of movement, tons of different touch, feeling all the different things, lots of sound seeking, lots of deep pressure seeking, and how filling up all of that information in our world really helps us feel very anchored and present, meets that threshold cap, as we call about when we're thinking about sensory cup sizes. And neither is right or wrong, right? We are processing the information from our world, external and internal, in all different ways. These are simply different experiences that we have and different nervous system stories, how we process through our world and how our nervous system responds. Just different stories, different ways of thinking about the world. And when we consider kind of more of a negative connotation of distracted, dramatic, distant, those can be underlying components of sensory needs, right? If I'm distracted, maybe I'm overreactive to those auditory cues in my world. I'm quickly responding and turning. If I'm dramatic, I might be having a large response, a large emotional response to something. If I'm quick to overflow my very small sensory cup. If I'm distant, I'm kind of pulling away and I'm needing a quiet space. Those can be those traits that we observe in others where the system has hit a max capacity and overload, and retreating away. Another way of thinking about it from a nervous system lens could be flight mode. I'm moving away from the overwhelming experience because my body and my brain are getting overstimulated and I need to go reset. So that could be, from the outside observer looking in, a distant person or a distant person trait or personality trait. I feel like sometimes that also can come into play with introversion as well when we're thinking about those social scenarios and the observations we see of individuals at parties, ones that are really engaged, more of a extrovert, really build a lot of energy when conversing with others. And maybe we have more of that introvert. So on the outskirts, maybe wall leaning, pushing against the wall and grounding the nervous system, not engaging as often or as frequent because it's kind of loud and it's a little bit too much. And so we're more of the receiver and the watcher. But it can be perceived as distant, as like a personality trait. So those can be, I think, when I think about observations and personality traits, there's always an interplay when it comes to the nervous system and sensory system. So just kind of a curious reflection point. So just kind of curious if you guys have any thoughts as you're listening to this podcast episode. But bringing in wonder and curiosity as we pivot to taking in this, but what if thought process. When we get to bring in curiosity and compassion instead of a desire to control, we get to open up an entirely different kind of space. It's really cool. It's really, really cool. I've seen this in action, and it's been a very lovely observation to see many people critically thinking together and coming up with solutions and activated and engaged with curiosity of possibilities of case studies and different ways of thinking about how we support and how we respond when we're supporting others. And so when we're thinking about maybe some examples that might increase this thought process of curiosity, when we think about maybe a kid who's sitting in their seat and they're doing a lot of movement, maybe they're tapping their pencil or kind of moving back and forth, they're not trying to annoy anyone, right? They're seeking proprioceptive input to stay focused. The maybe child who is avoidant of getting their hands messy, they're not wanting to try certain foods, that could be that foundational piece of tactile sensitivities. There could also be a big play with smell and our olfactory scent and the responsiveness that that individual is having for maybe a smell or a food or a texture of the food that is something that is novel or not. And so that could be a consideration when we're taking that pause and that step back and that curiosity instead of rotely judging, man, they're defiant, they're difficult. Maybe we can take a curiosity about the sensory lens and come from, I wonder if it is maybe that texture that's making them feel uncomfortable. And then we can ask, we can clarify, we can come up with an idea to help support a deeper understanding of that sensory need or those multiple sensory needs as it relates to engaging in the activity. Another example might be the adult that really needs a lot of quiet after social events. So they're not necessarily distant, right? It's a recalibration of the nervous system because it received a little too much stimulation. So we're needing that nervous system reboot, that reset, that quiet, usually darker, calmer ability to kind of pause and take a step back, look through the world with this curiosity of this sensory lens, and then beautifully, in such a wonderful human way, right, is to meet people where they are, not where we wish they would be. And that can be even that ability to connect and relate and not project our expectations upon another. This can be this foundation of a word that I learned about a decade ago, and I was like, wow, that's kind of a intriguing word, the concept of holding space. So this is really kind of a curiosity. And I think we can think about holding of space in many different ways. I think about it in a couple examples of even having my hands out and holding of the energetic space if someone's having a hard time. I think holding of space also allows a very powerful connection to support co-regulation. If someone is having a harder time, I think that can be a really beautiful offering as a human to another human who is struggling. And I think curiosity kind of flows in through all of this as well. We're leading forward with non-judgment. We're leading forward with curiosity. We're leading forward when it comes to a wondering. I wonder. And I really feel like it can help us reflect on noticing what's happening beneath the surface versus just that external or maybe immediate judgment. So another kind of fun reflection I have about holding of space as others are moving through their experiences of human emotions and being able to pause and notice those interoceptive cues in my body. As I see individuals having a harder time, I noticed my heart was racing, my kind of temperature in my cheeks was shifting a little bit. There was definitely a moment where I needed to kind of really focus in on my breath. That was my anchor during those moments. And it's been a really beautiful opportunity to consider holding of space and co-regulation and how it can be a true and very beautiful foundation of support for an individual whose nervous system is moving towards dysregulation. And slowing down of my body definitely took over. So I really kind of slowed down my movements, slowed down my voice, did a lot of listening, did a lot of visualizing in those heightened times as well. Just visualizing a healing ball of energy around me and it kind of extending over. I've been doing a little bit of research and finding it very cool experience physically and energetically when I practice something called heart math. And this is our ability to tap into heart coherence. And there's a lot of cool things about heart coherence if you ever want to do a little bit of digging and researching. But the main concept of how I'm interpreting heart math is a visualization of this joy, love, compassion, whatever energy you wish to hold from your heart, and visualizing sending it to another person, and that other person then smiling and receiving, and then visualizing sending it out to maybe the room that you're in where it impacts more people. And then it continues on and continues on, continues on to the entirety of the world. And it's a big, broad, beautiful way of thinking about energetically holding space. I feel like it's a really cool, big picture way of holding of the space and being able to share and connect. So that's just been a really cool little deep dive that I've been taking recently. As we kind of dive a little bit and shift into kind of some reflections, I've had a couple really cool teacher training opportunities lately, and we spent a few hours going through all 8 senses, the nervous system, and how we can kind of connect and have these reflections of sensory sensitive and sensory seekers and the different needs of each sensory system. At the end of the training, one teacher also mentioned it kind of stopped me in my tracks, right? Is that all strategies do not work for every child. Yeah, absolutely. And that's why going into a sensory informed lesson where we're taking the pause, we're able to step back and recalibrate and then trial and reflect and try again different techniques by having this sensory lens as kind of this foundation of sensory informed living, how we're moving through our world. It's really kind of that heart of what I love to do with Sensory Empower is this sensory informed teaching, how we think about the world. We're putting on our sensory goggles and we're reflecting about the curiosities of each individual's different needs, right? Each child is an individual. Each person is an individual. What are the foundational needs that are going to help with regulation? And another teacher had some beautiful reflections of just kind of the ability to compare traits of those over responsive versus under responsive. So having those big reactions versus needing more feedback in our world, and understanding all 8 sensory needs and how this really can help to shift and bring in curiosity and develop a deeper understanding and empathy where others are coming from. That was a really beautiful quote that I think really, really ties it up in this beautiful summary when we're thinking about stepping back and bringing in curiosity. This is exactly what this work is all about. This pause, this reflection, this ability to take a 5-second pause, the power of the pause before we jump in, before we ask another question. And I feel like a lot of these themes, when we're taking this step to pause and reflect, it really builds in the shift from frustration to fascination. This isn't working as planned. Shifted to, gosh, This is so fascinating. This is from reacting. I'm immediately jumping in without a pause, right? Immediately jumping in and then pausing and then shifting to reflecting. That didn't quite go as planned. Or, oh, curious, very curious. They had this response to this type of sensory input. Interesting. So this power of the pause, this ability to kind of pause, shift our own reaction, our own response as the adult in that moment, from frustration to fascination, from reacting to reflecting. It allows us to open up room for empathy to grow. And in that empathy, we can find that connection. We don't lose that connection with the individual that we're supporting. And I think that really kind of ties into our final conversation about holding space for someone's sensory experiences. We're not trying to fix it, right? We're honoring their needs. We're maybe suggesting some strategies or providing opportunities for different movements or holding different things in our hands or getting a drink of cold ice water to kind of help reset our system. And I feel like this is a very powerful connection, acknowledgement and holding of space. I see you. I see what your nervous system might be trying to communicate. So holding of space, just in review, can be taking a pause before reacting, asking yourself, what sensory need might be driving this behavior? So we're starting with that curiosity, offering choice, movement breaks, quiet corner visuals, offering deep pressure, and remembering that your own regulation sets tone for this interaction. The power of co-regulation. It's very, very apparent when I step into some rooms that if there is a state of dysregulation in an adult, we cannot co-regulate. Co-regulation is deeply important. If we, as the adult, are overstimulated, we can't model calm. So the first step of holding space is for others is learning to hold it for ourselves, right? The ability to pause and have a moment of self-reflection and a recalibration of our nervous system, demonstrating using a tool that helps to shift your system. And this really also connects with our knowing of our own sensory preferences and what thresholds we have. Do you need quiet time after work? Do bright lights drain you? Overstimulate your eyes, give you headaches? That's something that makes it hard for you to maintain a level of regulation. How about background noise? Is that something that makes it hard to think clearly if you have a lot going on in the background, or different things that you use as your tools, and honoring those needs and those strategies? And that allows more of a regulated nervous system show up more grounded, and that groundedness ripples out. And so the goal of this season of the Sensory Empower podcast, season 2, is really to keep expanding our capacity, not just to understand, but to embody sensory compassion, our ability to step into curiosity and holding of space of others and considering differences and similarities. I think in families, it definitely means noticing different patterns with curiosity. In relationships, remembering that everyone's nervous system is doing its best. There might be certain reasons as to why we're having some reactions to certain situations. And I really feel that when we start to see through this lens, everything kind of softens. Our words can soften, our tone can soften, and people feel safer. There's a capacity that we increase by allowing our nervous system to have. Because if we are modeling calm and regulated and a curiosity of how others are doing, I feel like it very much is apparent for everyone else in the room that we are seeing them, not the behavior. We're seeing the person, their needs. And this is really something that I feel like allows us to build this capacity to hold space as a human. So it's not about having all the answers, right? It's about cultivating this presence, this compassion, this curiosity, even when things get messy and confusing. So as you move through your week, I invite you to notice, how do you hold space? How do you build capacity for other sensory needs and your own sensory needs? Because when we start there, we don't just regulate, we relate, we connect. So I thank you, and please share your comments. I always love hearing your thoughts, and really curious about how this sits with you, if there's any reflections you have or certain situations that have popped up when you kind of have thought about holding space and reflecting and relating to others and differences or similarities of sensory needs. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you for listening to the Sensory Empower podcast. And if this episode resonated with you, please share it with a teacher or a parent or a friend who's also on this journey. And as always, keep noticing, keep nurturing, and keep empowering your sensory world. Thank you for joining me on this sensory adventure through Sensory Empower, the podcast. Remember, empowerment begins with awakening your senses. Subscribe now and embark on a journey of self-discovery and transformation. Until next time, may your senses guide you towards a life filled with peace, joy, and empowerment. Because true empowerment begins with embracing your senses.